When ruthless CEO Marcus Sterling opened Sarah's bag to confiscate company property, the crayon drawing inside showed a sick child asking, "Why doesn't Daddy come home anymore?" And the signature at the bottom made his blood run cold. Before we dive into this incredible story, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story, and leave a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. We'd love to hear your story too. The November rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 42nd floor, each droplet a percussion note in the symphony of Manhattan's morning rush. Marcus Sterling stood motionless at the head of the Sterling Industries boardroom, his granite jaw set in the expression that had earned him the nickname the Iceberg among his employees. At 38, he commanded the room with the presence of a man who had never known failure, never accepted excuses, and never allowed emotion to cloud his judgment. Revenue projections for Q4 are 17% below target, Marcus announced, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade through silk. His steel-gray eyes swept across the faces of his senior management team, each one avoiding direct contact with his penetrating stare. 17%. That's not a statistical anomaly, that's systematic failure. The conference room, with its polished mahogany table and ergonomic leather chairs that cost more than most people's monthly salaries, had witnessed countless such pronouncements. The walls, adorned with awards and accolades celebrating Sterling Industries' dominance in financial technology, seemed to absorb the tension that permeated every Monday morning executive meeting. Marcus adjusted his Italian silk tie, an unconscious gesture that his subordinates had learned to recognize as a prelude to someone's professional execution. His Armani suit, pressed to perfection, hung on his lean frame with the precision of armor. Every detail of his appearance was calculated. The Swiss watch that cost more than most people's cars, the handmade Oxford shoes that reflected the overhead lighting, the perfectly styled dark hair that showed no signs of the stress that consumed lesser men. "Janet," he continued, his attention shifting to the chief financial officer, a woman who had survived 5 years under his leadership through sheer competence and an ability to anticipate his demands. "Walk me through the account management department's performance metrics." Janet Chen opened her tablet with fingers that betrayed the slightest tremor, only sign of the anxiety that Marcus's presence invariably induced. The department averaged 94.3% efficiency ratings last quarter, with client retention at 97.8%. However, there have been some attendance issues that may be impacting overall productivity. Marcus's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Attendance issues. Specifically, tardiness patterns among certain employees, Janet clarified, her voice carefully neutral. Nothing that significantly impacts client relationships, but the cumulative effect on team morale and operational efficiency is measurable. Through the windows, Manhattan pulsed with its usual energy. Yellow cabs navigated the grid system with choreographed chaos, while pedestrians moved in patterns as predictable as migrating herds. From his elevated perch, Marcus observed this human anthill with the detachment of a scientist studying specimens. He had built Sterling Industries from a small fintech startup into a billion-dollar empire by understanding that success required sacrificed personal relationships, leisure time, and the luxury of human sentiment. "Measurable?" Marcus repeated, tasting the word as though it contained some bitter essence. "In my experience, Janet, measurable problems require decisive solutions." He moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back in a posture that suggested both contemplation and barely restrained aggression. "Schedule a department meeting for this afternoon. I want to address these attendance issues personally." The room's occupants exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their collective apprehension. When Marcus Sterling decided to address problems personally, careers often ended abruptly. His reputation for ruthless efficiency had built the company's success, but it had also created an atmosphere where even minor infractions could result in immediate termination. 23 floors below, in the accounts management department, Sarah Martinez sat at her desk, fingers flying across her keyboard with the desperation of someone racing against time itself. The morning had been a disaster from the moment her phone rang at 5:47 a.m. with news that would have brought most people to their knees. Tommy's fever had spiked during the night to 104.2 degrees, high enough to trigger the emergency protocols established by his oncology team. At 4 years old, her son battled acute lymphoblastic leukemia with the resilience that simultaneously amazed and terrified Sarah. His compromised immune system meant that even a common cold could become life-threatening, transforming routine childhood illnesses into medical emergencies. The emergency room at Mount Sinai had been a blur of concerned faces, IV tubes, and the antiseptic smell that had become too familiar over the past 8 months. Dr. Rodriguez, Tommy's primary oncologist, had arrived at 7:30, his expression grave as he reviewed the test results. "We need to adjust his chemotherapy protocol," he had explained, while Tommy slept fitfully in the hospital bed, his small body dwarfed by the medical equipment surrounding him. "The infection indicators suggest his system is struggling with the current regimen." Sarah had remained by his bedside until the fever broke at 9:15, holding his tiny hand while he mumbled about wanting to draw pictures for his mommy. Only when the nurses assured her that he was stable and would sleep for several hours did she reluctantly leave, racing across town to salvage what remained of her workday. Now, at her desk, she struggled to focus on the quarterly client reports that demanded her attention. Her eyes felt gritty from exhaustion, and her clothes hastily selected in the pre-dawn darkness carried the faint scent of hospital disinfectant. The coffee she'd grabbed from the lobby vendor had grown cold hours ago, but she barely noticed as she worked to catch up on the meetings she'd missed. Sarah. The voice belonged to Linda Patterson, her closest colleague and one of the few people in the office who knew about Tommy's condition. Linda approached with the careful concern of someone who understood the delicate balance Sarah maintained between her professional and personal responsibilities. "How is he?" Sarah looked up, grateful for the genuine concern in Linda's eyes. "Better. The fever broke, but they're adjusting his treatment plan again." She rubbed her temples, fighting off the headache that threatened to overwhelm her remaining concentration. "I hate that he has to go through this alone, while I'm here trying to keep my job." "You're not doing this alone," Linda reminded her gently, placing a supportive hand on Sarah's shoulder. "And Tommy understands that you work hard for him. He's proud of you." Before Sarah could respond, the unmistakable sound of expensive leather shoes on polished marble announced an approaching presence that made everyone in the department instinctively straighten their postures. Marcus Sterling entered the accounts management floor with the commanding presence of a general inspecting troops before battle. His eyes swept across the room, cataloging details with the precision of a surveillance system. The department, typically buzzing with phone conversations and keyboard clicking, fell into an unnatural silence. 23 employees suddenly found their computer screens fascinating, hoping to avoid direct eye contact with the man who held their professional futures in his perfectly manicured hands. Marcus's gaze stopped at Sarah's desk, noting the timestamp on her computer that indicated her late arrival. His expression remained neutral, but those who knew him well could detect the slight tightening around his eyes that preceded professional annihilation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus announced, his voice carrying easily across the open floor plan, "I've come to address what appears to be a concerning trend in this departmenta, casual attitude toward punctuality and professional commitment." Sarah felt her stomach clench with dread. She had been late 6 times in the past 2 months, each instance directly related to Tommy's medical care. Despite working longer hours to compensate and maintaining client satisfaction ratings above department averages, she knew that Marcus Sterling's definition of acceptable performance left no room for personal circumstances. "In the competitive landscape of financial technology," Marcus continued, beginning to pace with the measured steps of a predator circling prey, "success requires unwavering dedication. Our clients depend on our reliability, our precision, and our absolute commitment to excellence. When employees treat their responsibilities casually, it undermines everything we've built here." He stopped directly in front of Sarah's desk, his steel-gray eyes fixing on her with laser intensity. "Ms. Martinez, according to HR records, you've been late to work 6 times in the past 8 weeks. Would you care to explain this pattern of unprofessional behavior? The entire department held its collective breath. Sarah felt heat rising in her cheeks as 22 pairs of eyes focused on her, some with sympathy, others with the morbid fascination of spectators at a public execution. She stood slowly, her legs unsteady from exhaustion and stress. "Mr. Sterling," she began, her voice carefully controlled despite the turmoil churning in her chest. "I understand your concern about punctuality. I've had some personal circumstances that have occasionally interfered with my arrival time, but I've always stayed late to ensure my work meets our standards. My client satisfaction ratings remain above department averages, and I've never missed a deadline." Marcus's expression didn't soften. If anything, his jaw tightened further. Personal circumstances. How conveniently vague. He walked around her desk, examining her workspace with the scrutiny of an investigator gathering evidence. "Tell me, Ms. Martinez, do you believe that Sterling Industries should accommodate every employee's personal drama? Should we restructure our entire operation around your inability to manage your private life?" The words struck Sarah like physical blows. She thought of Tommy, lying in his hospital bed that morning, asking when she would return with his favorite juice box. She thought of the mounting medical bills that consumed her salary despite her insurance coverage. She thought of the nights she spent researching experimental treatments while working on client reports, desperate to find hope in statistical survival rates that seemed to diminish with each new complication. "I don't expect accommodation," Sarah replied, struggling to maintain her professional composure. "I expect understanding that sometimes life presents challenges that require prioritization. My son—" "Stop!" Marcus's voice cut through her explanation like a guillotine blade. "I don't care about your personal problems, Ms. Martinez. I care about results, reliability, and respect for this company's standards. What I see is an employee who believes her personal inconveniences justify disrupting our operational efficiency." The cruelty in his tone sparked something fierce in Sarah's chest. For months, she had endured the stress of watching her 4-year-old son battle cancer while maintaining her professional responsibilities with dedication that bordered on superhuman. She had missed school plays and doctor consultations to attend client meetings. She had worked from hospital waiting rooms and answered emails during chemotherapy sessions. All while this man, insulated by wealth and privilege, reduced her struggles to personal inconveniences. "My son has leukemia," Sarah said quietly, her voice carrying a strength that surprised even her. "He's 4 years old, and this morning he was rushed to the emergency room with a fever that could have killed him. I stayed until his doctors assured me he was stable, then came here to work because I need this job to pay for his treatments. That's not a personal inconvenience, Mr. Sterling. That's survival." For a moment, something flickered across Marcus's features so brief that most observers missed it entirely, but his expression quickly returned to its characteristic coldness. "Tragic as your situation may be, Ms. Martinez, it doesn't change the fundamental issue. You've demonstrated a pattern of unreliability that I cannot tolerate in this organization." He turned to address the entire department, his voice rising to ensure everyone heard his next words clearly. "Let this serve as an example to all of you. Sterling Industries demands excellence without compromise. We don't make exceptions for personal problems, family emergencies, or emotional appeals. We either perform at the highest level, or we find employment elsewhere." Turning back to Sarah, Marcus delivered his verdict with the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. "Miss Martinez, your employment with Sterling Industries is terminated, effective immediately. Please gather your personal belongings and surrender all company property to security." The department remained frozen in stunned silence. Linda's face reflected the horror that everyone felt but dared not express. Several colleagues stared at their computer screens, afraid that even sympathetic expressions might draw Marcus's wrathful attention to themselves. Sarah stood motionless for several seconds, processing the reality of her situation. Without this job, she couldn't afford Tommy's treatments. Without insurance coverage, his medical care would become impossible to maintain. The experimental drug protocol that offered his best chance of long-term remission cost more per month than most people earned in a year. "I need to collect my things," she said finally, her voice hollow with shock. "Security will supervise," Marcus replied coldly, "and I'll personally ensure that all company property is accounted for. We've had issues with terminated employees attempting to steal proprietary information." He gestured to James Morrison, the head of security, who had appeared as if summoned by some invisible signal. Morrison, a former police detective who had worked for Sterling Industries for 3 years, approached with professional efficiency but visible discomfort at the situation's harsh dynamics. Sarah began clearing her desk with mechanical precision, placing personal items into the small cardboard box that Morrison provided. Family photos, her coffee mug with Tommy's handprint painted on the side, the small cactus plant that had survived countless late nights under fluorescent lighting. Each item represented a piece of the life she'd built while fighting to save her son's future. Marcus watched her every movement with predatory attention, noting each item she placed in the box. His paranoia about corporate espionage had intensified over the years, fueled by competitors who would pay substantial sums for Sterling Industries' proprietary algorithms and client data. "That laptop contains sensitive company information," Marcus observed as Sarah powered down her computer. "Morrison, ensure that all files are secured before it leaves this building." Sarah nodded mechanically, too emotionally drained to feel additional humiliation. The laptop had been her lifeline during Tommy's hospitalizations, allowing her to work remotely when his condition required her presence at his bedside. Now it represented just another barrier between her and the door. As she continued packing, her hands encountered the small leather messenger bag she carried daily. Inside were the usual items: wallet, keys, phone charger, along with something infinitely more precious. She hesitated, hoping to retrieve it without drawing attention, but Marcus's sharp eyes missed nothing. "What's in the bag?" he demanded, extending his hand with the authority of someone accustomed to absolute compliance. Sarah's heart rate accelerated. "Just personal items, nothing related to company business." "I'll be the judge of that," Marcus replied, his tone brooking no argument. "Hand it over." With trembling fingers, Sarah surrendered the bag, watching as Marcus examined its contents with forensic thoroughness. He removed her wallet, phone charger, and small packet of tissues, setting each item aside with methodical precision. Then his hand encountered something that made him pause. The drawing was folded carefully, protected by a plastic sleeve that Sarah had purchased specifically to preserve it. Marcus unfolded the paper slowly, revealing a child's artwork created with crayons and markers. The image showed 3 figures: a woman with long dark hair, a small boy lying in what appeared to be a hospital bed, and a taller man standing apart from the others. Above the drawing, in the unsteady handwriting of a 4-year-old, were the words, "My family." Below each figure, Tommy had attempted to write names. "Mommy" appeared under the woman. "Me" was scrawled beneath the boy in the bed, and under the distant male figure, in letters that revealed the careful effort of a child learning to write, was the name Daddy. At the bottom of the page, in the space typically reserved for an artist's signature, Tommy had written his full name with the painstaking concentration that such tasks required. Tommy Sterling Martinez. Marcus stared at the drawing for what felt like an eternity but lasted perhaps 10 seconds. The color drained from his face as the implications crashed over him like a tsunami of recognition. The paper trembled slightly in his hands as his mind raced backward through time, calculating dates and confronting a truth he had never imagined. The room remained silent, every person present sensing that something significant was occurring but unable to comprehend its nature. Sarah watched Marcus's face transform from cold professionalism to something approaching horror, though she couldn't understand what had triggered such a dramatic change. "Where did this come from?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper, so different from the commanding tone he had used moments earlier. Sarah's protective instincts flared. "It's a drawing my son made. He likes to draw our family." "Your son," Marcus repeated, his eyes still fixed on the paper. "Tommy Sterling Martinez." The use of her son's full name sent ice through Sarah's veins. How could Marcus know Tommy's middle name? She had never mentioned it during her employment, and it certainly wasn't in any company records. The realization that Marcus Sterling, the cold, ruthless CEO who had just destroyed her livelihood, was connected to her son in some way she had never imagined, sent her mind spinning. "How do you know his name?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with sudden fear and confusion. Marcus looked up from the drawing, his steel-gray eyes now reflecting something entirely different: shock, recognition, and the dawning awareness of a connection that would change everything. The paper crinkled slightly as his hands tightened involuntarily around it, and for the first time in years, Marcus Sterling found himself completely at a loss for words. In that moment, surrounded by the stunned silence of the accounts management department, with a child's innocent drawing serving as an unexpected bridge between past and present, the carefully constructed walls of Marcus Sterling's controlled existence began to crumble. The drawing depicted not just any family, but his family, a family he had never known existed, created by a woman he had once cared for and abandoned, featuring a son who bore his name and had been fighting for his life while Marcus remained obliviously focused on profit margins and quarterly reports. The rain continued its assault on the windows, but inside the Sterling Industries building, the storm was just beginning. The drawing trembled in Marcus Sterling's hands as the full implications of what he was seeing crashed over him like a tidal wave of recognition. The crayon marks, so innocent in their childish imperfection, told a story that reordered his entire understanding of his own life. The small figure in the hospital bed, labeled "Me," bore an unmistakable resemblance to the Sterling family, features the same defined jawline that Marcus saw in his mirror each morning. The same intelligent eyes that had characterized generations of Sterling men. But it was the words scrawled across the top of the page in unsteady 4-year-old handwriting that drove the knife deeper into his chest. "I miss you, Daddy." Below that, in smaller letters that revealed a child's careful concentration, "When are you coming home?" Marcus's throat constricted as he studied every detail of the artwork. The woman Sarah was drawn with long dark hair and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The boy lay in what was clearly a hospital bed, surrounded by machines that Tommy had attempted to render with the limited artistic skills of a preschooler. And the man, standing apart from the mother and child, was drawn larger than the others but somehow more distant, separated by white space that spoke volumes about absence and longing. The silence in the accounts management department stretched like a taut wire, every employee frozen in their chairs as they witnessed their CEO's unprecedented display of vulnerability. Marcus Sterling, the man who had never shown emotion in boardrooms filled with millions in potential losses, stood motionless as color drained from his face like water from a broken vessel. "Tommy Sterling Martinez," he whispered again, the name feeling foreign on his tongue despite the profound recognition it triggered. His mind raced backward through time, calculating dates with the same precision he applied to financial projections. 5 years ago. The brief relationship with Sarah that had ended when he chose a merger opportunity over personal commitment, the timing aligned perfectly with the child's age. Sarah watched the transformation occurring in Marcus's expression with growing alarm. The cold professionalism had evaporated, replaced by something that looked dangerously close to devastation. "Mr. Sterling," she said carefully, "I need my son's drawing back. It's important to him." Marcus looked up from the paper, his steel-gray eyes now reflecting a chaos of emotions that he had spent decades learning to suppress. "Sterling," he repeated, focusing on her with laser intensity, "you gave him my name." The statement hung in the air between them like an accusation, though Sarah couldn't understand why her son's middle name should matter to a man who had just destroyed her livelihood. Her protective instincts flared as she realized that Marcus somehow knew more about Tommy than any stranger should. "It's a family name," Sarah replied defensively, though her voice wavered with uncertainty. "My grandfather's middle name was Sterling. It seemed appropriate." The lie came easily, born from years of protecting Tommy from questions about his father's absence. But Marcus Sterling hadn't built a billion-dollar empire by accepting surface explanations. His analytical mind, honed by years of detecting deception in corporate negotiations, immediately recognized the falsehood in her tone. "Don't lie to me," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying a dangerous undercurrent that made several nearby employees inch away from their desks. "Not about this, not about him." The possessive pronoun sent ice through Sarah's veins. The way Marcus said him suggested an ownership, a connection that she had never intended to reveal. For 4 years, she had successfully hidden Tommy's paternity, protecting her son from the potential rejection and disappointment that might come from a father who had already proven his capacity for abandoning those who inconvenienced him. "I don't know what you're implying," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. The truth was written in Marcus's expression, in the way he clutched the drawing as though it were evidence in a criminal trial, in the recognition that had transformed his features from professional coldness to something approaching desperation. Marcus moved closer to her desk, ignoring the audience of terrified employees who remained frozen in their workstations. "5 years ago," he said, his voice low but carrying clearly in the unnaturally quiet office, "you worked as a consultant for the Harrison Group during our acquisition negotiations. We had a relationship that lasted 3 months." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as Marcus methodically reconstructed their shared history. She remembered those months with crystal clarity, the whirlwind romance with a brilliant, ambitious man who had seemed different from the sharks that typically populated Manhattan's financial district. Marcus had been charming then, capable of gentleness and vulnerability that made her believe she had found someone who could balance professional success with personal connection. "You ended things abruptly," Marcus continued, his eyes never leaving her face as he searched for confirmation of what he already knew. "Said you needed to focus on your career. Moved to a different consulting firm. Disappeared from my life completely." "Because you made it clear that your work came first," Sarah shot back, her own memories flooding back with painful clarity. "Because you canceled 3 dinner dates in a row for business meetings. Because you told me that serious relationships were a luxury you couldn't afford until after the Harrison deal closed." The words sparked recognition in Marcus's eyes, not just of the conversation itself, but of the person he had been 5 years ago. Driven, ruthless, convinced that personal connections were obstacles to professional achievement. He had built Sterling Industries by sacrificing everything that didn't directly contribute to the bottom line, including relationships that might have brought meaning to his success. "But you were pregnant," Marcus said, the realization hitting him with the force of a physical blow. "When you disappeared, you were carrying my child." Sarah's silence was confirmation enough. She wrapped her arms around herself protectively, as though she could shield herself from the emotional devastation that this revelation was about to unleash. For 4 years, she had imagined this moment and prepared for it, but the reality was far more overwhelming than her worst-case scenarios had suggested. "Why didn't you tell me?" Marcus demanded, his voice rising despite his usual iron control. "Why didn't you give me the chance to—" "To what?" Sarah interrupted, her own composure finally cracking under the strain. "To offer money to make the problem disappear? To suggest that a child would damage your precious career trajectory? To tell me that I wasn't suitable for your world?" The accusations hit Marcus like arrows finding their mark because each one contained enough truth to wound. 5 years ago, he might indeed have responded to news of an unplanned pregnancy exactly as Sarah had predicted. His single-minded focus on building his empire had left no room for the complications that children represented. Around them, the accounts management department had become a theater of whispered drama. Employees who had witnessed Sarah's professional execution just minutes earlier now found themselves watching an even more shocking revelation unfold. Linda Patterson sat at her desk with her hand pressed to her mouth, finally understanding the full scope of Sarah's struggles over the past 4 years. Marcus ran his hand through his hair, destroying the perfect styling that had taken his personal groomer 40 minutes to achieve that morning. "I had a right to know," he said, but the conviction in his voice was wavering as he confronted the reality of who he had been when Tommy was conceived. You had already made your choice, Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the tears that threatened to spill over. When you told me that the Harrison deal was worth more than any relationship, when you made it clear that nothing personal would ever take priority over your business objectives, you told me everything I needed to know about what kind of father you would be. The memory crashed over Marcus with vivid clarity. The conversation had taken place in his penthouse apartment, the same space where he had entertained business associates and celebrated corporate victories. Sarah had been curled up on his Italian leather sofa, wearing one of his shirts and looking more beautiful than any woman had a right to look. She had been talking about the future, about the possibility of something permanent between them, about building a life together. And he had responded with charts and projections, explaining why the next 2 years were crucial for Sterling Industries' expansion, why personal commitments would dilute his focus, why successful men couldn't afford to be distracted by emotional attachments. He had spoken about their relationship as though it were a business arrangement that could be terminated when it no longer served his strategic objectives. I was protecting my company, Marcus said now, the excuse sounding hollow even to his own ears. You were protecting yourself, Sarah corrected, from any responsibility that might require you to be human instead of a profit-generating machine. The words stung because they contained a truth that Marcus had spent years avoiding. His dedication to Sterling Industries hadn't been purely about business success, it had been about maintaining control, about avoiding the vulnerability that genuine human connections demanded. Love required risk, and Marcus Sterling had built his empire by eliminating risk from every possible equation. But Tommy, Marcus said, looking down at the drawing again. The child's artwork seemed to pulse with accusation, each crayon stroke a reminder of birthday parties missed, bedtime stories never read, first words he had never heard. He's sick. He's fighting cancer, and I never even knew he existed. He's been fighting for 8 months, Sarah said quietly. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. He's had 3 surgeries, countless chemotherapy sessions, and more hospital stays than any 4-year-old should have to endure. And through all of it, he's asked about his daddy. Why he doesn't visit. When he might come home. Whether he loves him. Each word was a dagger, finding its mark in Marcus's chest. He thought about the countless hours he had spent in boardrooms, negotiating deals worth millions, while his son lay in a hospital bed, wondering why his father didn't care enough to visit. The irony was almost unbearable. He had been building a legacy for a family he didn't know existed, while that family struggled to survive without him. The drawing, Marcus said, his voice cracking slightly. He drew me as part of his family even though I've never been there. Children are optimistic, Sarah replied, wiping away a tear that had escaped despite her efforts to maintain composure. They believe in love even when the evidence suggests otherwise. Tommy has spent 4 years hearing other children talk about their daddies and constructing elaborate fantasies about his own. He's convinced that you're a superhero who's away on important missions to save the world. The image of his son, creating heroic narratives to explain his father's absence, was almost more than Marcus could bear. Tommy Sterling Martinez, a child, who carried his name and apparently his features had been facing the fight of his life, while maintaining faith in a father who had never known he existed. Marcus walked to the window, his usual commanding posture replaced by the hunched shoulders of a man carrying an unbearable weight. The Manhattan skyline stretched before him, a testament to the empire he had built through ruthless dedication and careful calculation. Sterling Industries occupied this building, employed over 3,000 people, and generated billions in annual revenue. Yet in this moment, all of his professional achievements felt meaningless when measured against the family he had unknowingly abandoned. "Show me," he said suddenly, turning back to Sarah with desperate intensity. "Show me pictures of him. Tell me about his treatment. Help me understand what I've missed." Sarah hesitated, her protective instincts warring with the recognition that Marcus's reaction wasn't what she had expected. She had prepared for denial, for legal threats, for attempts to minimize his responsibility. She hadn't prepared for genuine devastation or what appeared to be authentic remorse. "I don't carry many pictures," she said carefully, retrieving her phone from the messenger bag with trembling fingers. Hospital security is strict about photography, and Tommy gets tired easily. But I have a few. She scrolled through her phone, finding a recent photo taken during one of Tommy's better days. The image showed a small boy with Marcus's distinctive jawline and intelligent eyes, but rendered fragile by the effects of chemotherapy. His head was covered with just the faintest fuzz of hair beginning to grow back, and his smile was brave but weary. Marcus stared at the screen as though it contained the secrets of the universe. The resemblance was undeniable. Tommy looked exactly as Marcus had at the same age, according to family photos his grandmother had preserved. The Sterling genetics were strong, marking the child as unmistakably his offspring despite 5 years of separation. "He's beautiful," Marcus whispered, his usual commanding voice reduced to something barely audible. "He looks like you," Sarah finished. "Everyone says so. The nurses, the doctors, other parents in the oncology ward. They assume I'm divorced, that his father will visit eventually. I've never corrected them because it's easier than explaining that his father doesn't know he exists." The weight of missed opportunities pressed down on Marcus like a physical force. 5 years of birthdays, first words, first steps, Christmas mornings, bedtime stories, and countless small moments that comprise the foundation of parent-child relationships. All lost because he had been too focused on building his professional legacy to recognize the personal legacy growing in the woman he had pushed away. "His treatment," Marcus said, forcing himself to focus on practical matters before the emotional magnitude of the situation overwhelmed him completely. "What does he need? What are the doctors saying about his prognosis?" Sarah looked at him suspiciously, uncertain whether his interest was genuine or merely an attempt to gather information that might protect him from potential legal obligations. "His treatment is aggressive but promising. The oncology team at Mount Sinai is excellent, and his response to chemotherapy has been better than expected, but the costs." She trailed off, unwilling to discuss the financial pressures that had driven her to work impossible hours while caring for a sick child. The insurance covered most expenses, but the deductibles, co-payments, and experimental treatments that offered the best hope for long-term remission created a burden that consumed her entire salary and more. "Money isn't an issue," Marcus said immediately. "Whatever he needs, whatever gives him the best chance for recovery, cost is irrelevant." "It's not that simple," Sarah replied, her voice hardening with protective anger. "You can't buy your way into being a father, Marcus. Tommy doesn't need a stranger writing checks. He needs someone who will sit beside his bed during chemotherapy, who will read him stories when he can't sleep, who will hold him when he's scared of the machines that keep him alive." The criticism hit Marcus harder than any business rival's attack ever had. Sarah was right, had no experience with the patient, daily work of parenting. His own childhood had been spent in boarding schools and summer programs designed to prepare him for eventual leadership of the family business. Emotional connections had been treated as inefficiencies to be minimized in favor of academic achievement and social networking that would benefit his future career. "I don't know how to be a father," Marcus admitted, the confession costing him enormous effort. "But I want to learn. I want to try." "Trying isn't good enough," Sarah shot back. "Tommy has already endured enough disappointment for several lifetimes. I won't let you experiment with his emotional well-being just because you've discovered that fatherhood might be an interesting new challenge." The exchange was drawing attention from across the department, where employees pretended to work while straining to overhear the conversation that was reshaping their understanding of their intimidating CEO. Marcus Sterling, the man who had fired people for missing quarterly targets by fractions of a percent, was being lectured about parental responsibility by a woman he had just terminated. James Morrison, the head of security, approached cautiously. "Mr. Sterling, should I proceed with escorting Ms. Martinez from the building?" Marcus looked at Morrison as though he were speaking a foreign language. The termination, which had seemed so justified just minutes earlier, now appeared monstrously unjust. Sarah hadn't been failing in her professional duty as she had been performing heroically while managing circumstances that would have destroyed most people's ability to function. "No," Marcus said sharply. Ms. Martinez's employment status is under review. Sarah stared at him in confusion. I don't want your pity job, Marcus. I don't want anything from you except to be left alone to take care of my son. Our son, Marcus corrected, the possessive pronoun feeling strange but undeniably accurate. And you're not getting a pity job. You're getting the recognition that you should have received years ago. Your client satisfaction ratings are the highest in the department despite missing work for medical emergencies. Your performance under pressure has been exemplary, by any reasonable standard. He turned to address the entire department, his voice carrying the authority that had cowed boardrooms full of experienced executives. Let me be clear about something. Ms. Martinez represents the kind of dedication and resilience that built this company. Anyone who questions her commitment to excellence will answer directly to me. The employees exchanged glances that reflected their amazement at witnessing Marcus Sterling publicly reversing his own decision. Linda Patterson looked as though she was watching a miracle unfold in real time. I don't want your public vindication, Sarah said, gathering her belongings with renewed determination. I want to take care of Tommy without having to worry about whether his father will decide that we're too much trouble for his carefully controlled life. Marcus watched her pack the few items she had removed from the card box, realizing that he was witnessing the departure of not just an employee, but the mother of his child and the only connection he had to a son who was fighting for his life. The drawing remained clutched in his hand, a testament to a little boy's faith in a father who had never earned it. Where are you going? Marcus asked, his usual composure cracking completely. How will I find you? How will I see him? Sarah paused at her desk, looking at the man who had unknowingly shaped her life for the past 5 years. You won't, she said quietly. Tommy has enough challenges without adding a father who sees him as another business problem to solve. He deserves better than someone who might disappear when the novelty wears off or when his illness becomes inconvenient. As Sarah walked toward the elevator, carrying her cardboard box of personal belongings and leaving behind the job that had provided Tommy's medical insurance, Marcus Sterling experienced something entirely foreign to his usual emotional repertoire: complete helplessness. The man who had built an empire through decisive action and strategic thinking found himself paralyzed by the recognition that money and power were useless weapons against the damage his own choices had created. The drawing remained in his hands, Tommy's innocent artwork serving as evidence of everything he had lost before he ever knew it existed. I miss you, Daddy. And when are you coming home? Written in crayon by a 4-year-old who had spent his entire life hoping for love from a man who had been too focused on profit margins to recognize the greatest opportunity of his lifetime. As the elevator doors closed behind Sarah, Marcus Sterling stood alone in his accounts management department, surrounded by employees who had just witnessed the complete demolition of their CEO's legendary composure. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus faced a problem that couldn't be solved through negotiation, acquisition, or termination. He had a son he had never met, a woman who had every reason to hate him, and the devastating knowledge that his child was fighting cancer while believing his father simply didn't care enough to visit. The rain continued its assault on the 42nd floor windows, but the storm that mattered most was just beginning to gather strength in the shattered remains of Marcus Sterling's carefully constructed world. The elevator descended through 42 floors in silence that felt like free fall. Sarah clutched the cardboard box containing the remnants of her professional life, her hands trembling not from the weight of her belongings, but from the seismic shift that had just occurred in her carefully constructed world. The revelation that Marcus Sterling was Tommy's biological father had transformed her from a terminated employee into the keeper of secrets that could reshape both their lives. As the elevator reached the ground floor, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Mount Sinai Hospital. Tommy asking for Mommy. Vitals stable but restless. Please advise, ETA. The message sent her rushing through the Sterling Industries lobby, past the marble sculptures and crystal chandeliers that represented the wealth and power her son's father commanded while his child fought for survival 23 blocks away. The taxi ride to the hospital blurred past in a haze of Manhattan traffic and racing thoughts. Sarah stared out the window at the city that had been both sanctuary and battleground for the past 5 years, remembering the naive young woman who had once believed that love could bridge any gap between two people from different worlds. That woman had discovered the hard way that successful men like Marcus Sterling didn't compromise their ambitions for inconvenient emotions or unplanned responsibilities. Mount Sinai's pediatric oncology ward had become Sarah's second home over the past 8 months, its sterile corridors and antiseptic smell as familiar as her own apartment. She navigated the maze of hallways with the efficiency of someone who had memorized every shortcut, every vending machine, every quiet corner where exhausted parents could collapse without being observed by their children. Tommy's room was on the 7th floor, number 714, a space that had been transformed from standard hospital accommodation into something resembling a child's bedroom through Sarah's determined efforts. Drawings covered every available wall surface. Tommy's artwork depicting superheroes, space adventures, and the recurring theme of family reunions. A small Christmas tree, despite being February, stood in the corner because Tommy had asked to keep it up until Daddy came home. "Mommy?" Tommy's voice, weakened by months of treatment but still capable of pure joy, greeted Sarah as she entered the room. He struggled to sit up in the hospital bed, his small frame dwarfed by the medical equipment that monitored his every heartbeat and breath. At 4 years old, Tommy Sterling Martinez possessed an otherworldly wisdom that came from spending more time with adult medical professionals than with children his own age. "Hi, sweetheart," Sarah said, dropping the cardboard box and rushing to embrace her son. His body felt impossibly fragile against hers, the weight loss from chemotherapy evident despite his determination to appear strong for her benefit. "How are you feeling? Did the nurses take good care of you while Mommy was at work?" Tommy nodded enthusiastically, his eyes bright with the resilience that had amazed his medical team since diagnosis. "Nurse Patricia let me listen to my heart with her stethoscope, and Dr. Rodriguez said my white blood cells are being very good today. But I missed you lots and lots." Sarah buried her face in what remained of Tommy's hair, fighting back tears that had been building since the confrontation with Marcus. How could she explain to a 4-year-old that his father, the man he drew in every family picture, the superhero he invented elaborate stories about, had just fired her from the job that provided his medical insurance? "Mommy has to tell you something important," Sarah said gently, settling into the reclining chair that had served as her bed during countless overnight hospital stays. "There might be some changes at my work, which means we need to be extra brave together." Tommy's expression grew serious with the premature gravity that sick children often developed. "Are you in trouble because you stayed with me this morning? I told you I could be brave by myself, but you said never to be brave alone." The memory of that morning felt like a lifetime ago. Tommy's fever spiking at dawn, the frantic call to his oncology team, the race to the emergency room, where they had waited for 3 hours to determine whether his latest infection required immediate intervention or could be managed with adjusted medications. Throughout the ordeal, Tommy had clutched the drawing he had made for his father, asking repeatedly when Daddy would visit to see his artwork. "You're never in trouble for being sick, baby," Sarah assured him, smoothing the thin blanket that covered his legs. "Sometimes grown-ups have to make difficult decisions, and Mommy is figuring out the best way to take care of you." The truth was far more complicated than any explanation she could offer a 4-year-old. Without her Sterling Industries position, Sarah would lose the health insurance that made Tommy's treatment possible. The COBRA coverage would last 18 months but cost more than her entire monthly income. Finding another job with comparable benefits while caring for a child in active cancer treatment seemed nearly impossible. Tommy studied her face with the perceptive intelligence that had worried his doctors since infancy. His IQ tests consistently placed him in the gifted range, an intellectual precocity that made him simultaneously easier and more difficult to parent. He understood far more than most children his age, but lacked the emotional development to process the adult complexities surrounding his illness. "Is Daddy coming to visit soon?" Tommy asked, the question that had become a daily ritual. "I finished the drawing of our house, and I want to show him where his room would be." Sarah's heart clenched with familiar pain. For 4 years, she had deflected this question with vague promises and elaborate explanations about Daddy's important work saving the world. The fantasy had begun as a protective mechanism but had evolved into an elaborate mythology that Tommy had embraced with the absolute faith of childhood. "Daddy's work is very complicated," Sarah replied, using the standard response that had served them for years. "But he thinks about you every day and wishes he could be here." The lie came easily after years of practice, but it tasted bitter in her mouth now that she knew Marcus was 23 blocks away, commanding his empire from the 42nd floor of Sterling Industries, while his son drew pictures of imaginary family reunions. How could she explain that Daddy not only existed but had just destroyed their financial security while remaining oblivious to the child who worshipped him? Dr. Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand, an expression grave in the way that had learned to interpret as either very good news or very bad news. At 45, Dr. Elena Rodriguez had specialized in pediatric oncology for 15 years, treating hundreds of children through the nightmare of cancer diagnosis and treatment. Her reputation for both clinical excellence and compassionate care had made her the most sought-after pediatric oncologist in Manhattan. "Sarah, I need to discuss Tommy's latest test results," Dr. Rodriguez said, glancing meaningfully toward the hallway to indicate they should speak privately. Sarah kissed Tommy's forehead and promised to return in a few minutes, following the doctor into the corridor, where exhausted families conducted whispered conversations about life and death decisions. The pediatric oncology ward operated under its own emotional ecosystem, where hope and despair coexisted in the fluorescent-lit spaces between patient rooms. "His response to the current protocol has been excellent," Dr. Rodriguez began, consulting her tablet with the precision that had saved countless young lives. "The blast count is down to less than 5%, which puts him in the technical remission range. However, given the aggressive nature of his particular leukemia variant, we need to discuss next steps." Sarah absorbed the medical terminology with the fluency of someone who had been forced to become an expert in pediatric oncology over the past 8 months. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia in children under 5 required protocols that were simultaneously more aggressive and more delicate than adult treatments. Tommy's youth worked in his favor for recovery potential, but against him in terms of treatment tolerance. "What are you recommending?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she knew the answer and dreaded the financial implications. "The experimental CAR T-cell therapy program at Memorial Sloan Kettering," Dr. Rodriguez replied. "It's showing remarkable results for cases like Tommy's, with long-term remission rates approaching 93%. The treatment involves extracting his T-cells, genetically modifying them to target cancer cells more effectively, then reintroducing them to his system." The description sounded like science fiction, but Sarah had learned that pediatric oncology often resembled miraculous technology wrapped in devastating costs. "And the expense?" Dr. Rodriguez hesitated, her expression reflecting the uncomfortable intersection of medical advancement and economic reality. "The protocol costs approximately $250,000, not including hospitalization, monitoring, and follow-up care. Most insurance companies are still evaluating coverage policies for experimental treatments." The figure hit Sarah like a physical blow. $250,000 represented more money than she could earn in 5 years, assuming she could find another position with health benefits. The cruel irony wasn't lost on her. Tommy's father commanded resources that could provide this treatment without financial strain, but revealing Marcus's identity might expose her son to potential rejection that could prove more damaging than cancer itself. "How long do we have to make this decision?" Sarah asked, calculating the time needed to research alternatives, appeal insurance denials, and possibly explore legal options for establishing paternity and support obligations. "Tommy's current remission gives us approximately 3 to 4 months before we would need to implement the CAR T protocol," Dr. Rodriguez explained. "I understand the financial burden, Sarah. There are grant programs, charitable foundations, and payment assistance options we can explore. No child should be denied treatment because of cost considerations." As they spoke, Tommy's laughter drifted from his room, where he was apparently entertaining himself by conducting elaborate conversations with his stuffed animals. The sound represented everything Sarah was fighting to preserve her son's joy, his future, his right to grow up and experience the life that every child deserved. "Can I see the detailed treatment plan?" Sarah asked. "I need to understand exactly what we're facing." Dr. Rodriguez handed her a thick folder containing medical protocols, statistical outcomes, and financial estimates that would have overwhelmed most people. Sarah had learned to navigate medical bureaucracy with the determination of someone whose child's life depended on understanding every detail, every option, every alternative pathway to survival. That evening, after Tommy had fallen asleep surrounded by the medical equipment that maintained his fragile stability, Sarah sat in the hospital's family lounge reading through the CAR-T therapy documentation. The treatment facility was quiet, except for the occasional footsteps of night shift nurses and the distant sounds of medical equipment monitoring sick children throughout the ward. The family lounge served as a gathering place for parents, grandparents, and siblings whose lives had been reorganized around childhood cancer diagnoses. Sarah had spent countless hours in this space, sometimes reading medical literature, sometimes working on Sterling Industries projects, sometimes simply staring at the wall while processing the latest developments in Tommy's treatment. Tonight, the lounge was nearly empty except for Maria Santos, whose 6-year-old daughter was being treated for brain cancer, and Robert Kim, whose twin boys were both battling the same rare form of leukemia that had stricken them simultaneously. These relationships, forged in the crucible of shared terror and hope, had become Sarah's primary social support system over the past 8 months. "You look like you received difficult news," Maria observed, settling into the chair beside Sarah's with the careful movements of someone who hadn't slept properly in months. "The doctors called a conference?" Sarah nodded, unsure how to explain the complexity of her situation without revealing details about Tommy's father that she had kept secret for 4 years. "They want to try an experimental treatment that could cure him, but the cost is astronomical, and my insurance probably won't cover it." "The CAR-T program?" Robert asked, looking up from his own stack of medical documents. "We've been researching the same option for the boys. The results are promising, but the financial barriers are almost insurmountable for most families." The 3 parents shared the grim understanding of families facing impossible choices between their children's survival and financial ruin. Medical bankruptcies were common in pediatric oncology, where treatments could extend for years and costs accumulated beyond any reasonable family budget. "Have you considered legal action against the father for support?" Maria asked gently. She had learned fragments of Sarah's story over their months of shared vigils, though Sarah had never revealed the specific identity of Tommy's absent parent. "It's complicated," Sarah replied, which had become her standard response to questions about Tommy's father. "He doesn't know Tommy exists, and I'm not sure involving him would be in Tommy's best interest." The partial truth was easier than explaining that Tommy's father was one of Manhattan's most powerful CEOs, that revealing paternity might provide financial resources, but could also expose her son to potential rejection, custody battles, and the emotional trauma of discovering that his beloved daddy was a stranger who had never chosen to be part of his life. Sarah's phone buzzed with an email notification. The message was from Sterling Industries' Human Resources Department, officially confirming her termination and outlining the timeline for Cobra health insurance coverage. She had 60 days to elect continuation coverage at a cost of $2,847 per month, nearly triple her rent and more than she had ever earned in a single month. The financial mathematics were brutal and inescapable. Without steady employment, she couldn't afford Cobra premiums. Without health insurance, Tommy's treatment would become impossible to continue. Without treatment, the aggressive leukemia would likely claim his life within 6 months. The experimental CAR-T therapy represented hope, wrapped in a price tag that might as well have been $1 billion. As Sarah sat in the hospital family lounge, surrounded by other parents facing similar impossible choices, she began to consider the option she had avoided for 4 years. Marcus Sterling possessed resources that could provide Tommy with the best possible care without financial strain. Establishing paternity might create legal obligations that would ensure Tommy's medical needs were met regardless of Marcus's personal feelings about unexpected fatherhood. But revealing Tommy's existence also carried enormous risks. Marcus had built his life around control, precision, and the elimination of variables that threatened his carefully constructed plans. A sick child requiring extensive medical care and emotional support represented exactly the kind of complication that had driven him to end their relationship 5 years earlier. More importantly, Tommy had spent 4 years creating elaborate fantasies about his absent father. The child believed his daddy was a superhero engaged in important missions to save the world, not a cold businessman who had rejected his mother before learning about his existence. The potential for devastating disappointment seemed almost as dangerous as the cancer itself. Sarah's phone rang, startling her from these contemplations. The caller ID showed her sister Carmen's number, calling from Denver where she worked as a nurse and raised her own 3 children on a single income. "How's Tommy tonight?" Carmen asked without preamble. The sisters had developed a routine of evening check-ins, allowing Carmen to monitor her nephew's progress, despite being unable to provide direct support due to her own financial limitations. "Stable," Sarah replied, using the medical terminology that had become second nature. "But the doctors want to try a new treatment that costs $250,000. Carmen's sharp intake of breath carried clearly through the phone connection. As a medical professional, she understood both the promise of cutting-edge cancer treatments and the financial devastation they could create for families. "Insurance won't cover it?" "Experimental protocol," Sarah explained. "Most insurers are still evaluating coverage policies, and I lost my job today, which means I'll be on COBRA within 60 days. The silence stretched between them as Carmen processed the implications. Both sisters had grown up in poverty, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs to keep them housed and fed. They understood that financial resources often determined access to opportunities, education, and now medical care that could save Tommy's life. "What about his father?" Carmen asked carefully. This conversation had occurred multiple times over the past 4 years, with Carmen advocating for practical solutions while Sarah insisted on protecting Tommy from potential rejection. "He doesn't know Tommy exists," Sarah repeated, the standard explanation that had become increasingly inadequate as Tommy's medical needs intensified. "Maybe it's time he learned," Carmen suggested with the directness that had characterized their relationship since childhood. "Tommy needs resources that you can't provide alone, Sarah. Pride won't pay for cancer treatment." After ending the call, Sarah returned to Tommy's room, where he slept peacefully despite the medications flowing through his IV line. His face, still retaining some baby fat despite the weight loss from treatment, looked angelic in the dim lighting provided by medical equipment indicators. He clutched a worn stuffed elephant named George, the companion that had accompanied him through every hospitalization, every procedure, every moment of fear when his small world seemed dominated by pain and uncertainty. On his bedside table lay the drawing that had revealed everything to Marcus that afternoon. Tommy's innocent artwork depicting the family he longed for, complete with a father who existed only in his imagination. Beside it was a newer creation, still wet with crayon marks, showing the same 3 figures but with additional details that revealed Tommy's evolving understanding of his situation. In this latest drawing, the boy in the hospital bed was surrounded by more medical equipment, rendered with the accuracy of a child who had become familiar with IV poles, heart monitors, and oxygen machines. The mother figure appeared tired, with lines around her eyes that matched Sarah's increasing exhaustion. But the father figure remained larger than life, drawn with a cape and surrounded by symbols that Tommy associated with heroic power. Sarah studied the artwork with tears threatening to spill over. Her son had created an idealized version of the father who had rejected his existence before even learning about it. Tommy's daddy was brave, strong, and devoted everything that Marcus Sterling had proven himself not to be when faced with the inconvenience of unplanned emotional obligations. Yet now, with Tommy facing a medical crisis that required resources beyond Sarah's reach. The identity of his biological father had become relevant in ways she had hoped to avoid. Marcus Sterling's wealth could provide the experimental treatment that offered Tommy's best chance for long-term survival. But accessing those resources meant exposing her son to potential disappointment, rejection, and the shattering of innocent illusions that had sustained him through months of painful treatment. As Sarah settled into the reclining chair that served as her bed during Tommy's hospitalizations, she faced the most difficult decision of her life. She could continue protecting Tommy from the truth about his father, maintaining the heroic mythology that brought him comfort while searching for alternative funding sources that might not exist. Or she could reveal Marcus's identity, pursuing legal recognition of paternity and financial support while risking emotional devastation that could prove more harmful than cancer itself. Outside Tommy's window, Manhattan glittered with the lights of a city where desperate parents made impossible choices every night. Somewhere in that constellation of illumination, Marcus Sterling probably sat in his penthouse apartment, processing the revelation that he had a son who carried his name and his genetic legacy. Whether that knowledge would transform him into the father Tommy needed or confirm Sarah's worst fears about his capacity for genuine human connection remained the terrifying unknown that would determine her son's future. The night stretched ahead with the weight of decisions that couldn't be postponed indefinitely. Tommy's remission provided a narrow window of opportunity, but time was becoming an enemy that threatened to close off options before she could find the courage to pursue them. As her son slept peacefully beside her, Sarah Martinez began to plan for a confrontation she had avoided for 4 years, one that would either save Tommy's life or break both their hearts beyond repair. The Sterling Industries building had never felt more like a prison than it did in the hours following Sarah's departure. Marcus Sterling stood at his office windows, watching the ant-like movement of people on the streets below, each one presumably returning to families that provided meaning beyond quarterly earnings reports. The drawing remained spread across his desk, Tommy's innocent artwork serving as evidence of a life he had unknowingly shaped through his absence. For 3 hours, Marcus attempted to focus on the quarterly budget reviews that demanded his attention, but the numbers blurred into meaninglessness when measured against the reality of his son's existence. His assistant, Jennifer, had entered twice to inquire about postponed meetings and unanswered phone calls, only to retreat in confusion when faced with her normally decisive CEO staring blankly at financial projections. "Sir?" Jennifer ventured during her third attempt to restore his schedule. "The Yamamoto Industries representatives are waiting in Conference Room C. They've been there for 45 minutes. Marcus looked up from Tommy's drawing as though emerging from a trance. The Yamamoto meeting represented a potential merger worth $800 million, the kind of deal that would typically command his complete attention and strategic focus. Today, it seemed as relevant as yesterday's weather report. "Reschedule," Marcus said quietly, his voice lacking its usual commanding authority. "Reschedule everything for the rest of the week." Jennifer's eyebrows rose in alarm. In 5 years as Marcus Sterling's executive assistant, she had never known him to cancel a business meeting, much less an entire week's worth of negotiations and strategic planning sessions. "Sir, the Yamamoto deal has a deadline." "Then let them wait," Marcus interrupted, folding Tommy's drawing with careful precision and placing it in his jacket pocket. "Some things are more important than merger timelines." The statement was so fundamentally contrary to everything Jennifer knew about her employer that she wondered if he was experiencing some kind of medical episode. Marcus Sterling had built his empire on the principle that nothing was more important than business opportunities, that personal considerations were luxuries that successful men couldn't afford. As evening descended over Manhattan, Marcus found himself in his Tesla, driving through neighborhoods he rarely visited toward an address he had obtained through methods that skirted the edges of privacy laws. His security team maintained detailed files on all employees, ostensibly for safety purposes, but practically serving as insurance against potential threats or embarrassments to the company's reputation. Sarah Martinez's personnel file contained her current address, emergency contacts, and enough personal information to construct a basic profile of her life outside Sterling Industries. The journey from his penthouse world to Sarah's reality took him through a geographical and socio-economic transformation that occurred within the span of 20 city blocks. The gleaming towers of Midtown Manhattan gave way to older apartment buildings, family-owned businesses, and the visible evidence of people living within modest means. This was the New York that existed beyond Marcus's usual experience, functional, diverse, and operating according to priorities that had nothing to do with stock valuations or market dominance. Sarah's building occupied a corner lot in Astoria, its pre-war architecture suggesting solidity rather than luxury. The brick facade showed its age, but appeared well-maintained, with small balconies where residents had created tiny gardens or displayed children's artwork. Marcus parked across the street, studying the building with the analytical attention he typically reserved for potential real estate acquisitions. Through the lobby's glass doors, he could observe the modest interior fluorescent lighting, industrial carpeting, and mailboxes that bore handwritten nameplates rather than engraved brass markers. This was honest, working-class housing for people who measured success in terms of safety, stability, and proximity to good schools, rather than prestigious addresses or architectural statements. Marcus sat in his car for nearly an hour, processing the gap between his assumptions about Sarah's life and the reality before him. He had imagined her living in comfortable circumstances, perhaps not luxury, but certainly not the obviously constrained environment that this building represented. The realization that his son was being raised in such modest conditions while Marcus commanded resources that could have provided infinitely better living situations created a guilt that felt like physical weight in his chest. Movement in a fourth-floor window caught his attention. Sarah appeared briefly, silhouetted against warm interior lighting, carrying what appeared to be medical equipment. The sight galvanized Marcus into action. He needed to see his son, to understand the daily reality of Tommy's battle against cancer, to begin comprehending the magnitude of everything he had missed through his own willful blindness. The building's security system was minimala, simple intercom, requiring visitors to be buzzed in by residents. Marcus pressed the button for apartment 4B, his heart hammering with anticipation and terror in equal measure. The response came after a long pause, Sarah's voice distorted by the cheap electronic system. "Who is it?" "Sarah, it's Marcus. I need to see him, please." The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds before the door buzzed open. Marcus climbed 4 flights of stairs that smelled faintly of cooking spices and cleaning products, each step carrying him further from his familiar world of controlled environments and predictable outcomes. The hallway was narrow but clean, with worn carpeting that muffled his footsteps as he approached apartment 4B. Sarah opened the door before he could knock, her expression a mixture of resignation and fierce protectiveness. She had changed from her professional attire into jeans and a sweater that revealed the toll that months of stress had taken on her frame. Her face, still beautiful but marked by exhaustion, reflected the kind of bone-deep weariness that came from carrying impossible burdens without adequate support. "You shouldn't be here," Sarah said quietly, blocking the doorway with her body. "Tommy doesn't know who you are, and I won't let you experiment with his emotional well-being just because you've suddenly developed parental curiosity." Marcus studied her face, recognizing the woman he had once cared for, but seeing her transformed by experiences that had nothing to do with his memory of their relationship. The Sarah he remembered had been ambitious, optimistic, and convinced that dedication and intelligence could overcome any obstacle. This Sarah carried herself with the vigilant strength of someone who had learned that life could be both precious and cruel beyond imagination. "I know I don't have the right to be here," Marcus replied, his voice carrying none of its usual commanding authority. "But he's my son, Sarah. I can't pretend I don't know that anymore." "He's been your son for 4 years?" Sarah shot back, her voice sharp with anger that had been building since the moment Marcus had first dismissed their relationship as incompatible with his professional objectives. Where was this paternal concern when he was born? Where was it during his first steps, his first words, his first day of preschool? Where was it when he was diagnosed with cancer 8 months ago? Each question landed like a physical blow, forcing Marcus to confront the accumulation of missed moments that could never be recovered. He had been building his empire while his son learned to walk, negotiating mergers while Tommy spoke his first sentences, celebrating business victories while his child faced the terror of cancer diagnosis. From somewhere inside the apartment came a small voice, weak but unmistakably curious. "Mommy, who's at the door? Is it Daddy?" The innocent question seemed to pierce through Sarah's protective anger, replacing it with something closer to panic. She glanced back into the apartment, then returned her attention to Marcus with an expression that reflected her impossible situation. "He's having a difficult evening," Sarah explained, her voice softening despite her anger. "The new medications make him nauseous, and he's been asking about his father more frequently since his last hospitalization. I've been telling him stories about his daddy to keep his spirits up." "What kind of stories?" Marcus asked, though he suspected the answer would only deepen his guilt. "That you're a superhero on important missions to save the world," Sarah replied, her tone mixing regret with defiance. "That you think about him every day but can't visit because your work is too important to abandon. That you love him more than anything but have to stay away to protect him from dangerous enemies." The elaborate mythology she had constructed to protect Tommy from the truth about his father's indifference struck Marcus as both beautiful and heartbreaking. His son had spent 4 years believing in a heroic parent who existed only in Sarah's imagination, developed to shield a sick child from the devastating reality that his father had simply never cared enough to be present. "Mommy?" Tommy's voice came again, closer now, suggesting he was approaching the door despite his physical limitations. Sarah made a decision that visibly cost her enormous effort. 5 minutes, she said, stepping aside to allow Marcus into the apartment. "But if you hurt him, if you say anything that damages his trust or his hope, I will make sure you never see him again, regardless of what legal rights you might think you have." Marcus entered the small apartment with the reverence of someone entering a sacred space. The living room was tiny but immaculately organized, with medical equipment positioned discreetly against one wall and children's artwork covering every available surface. The furniture was second-hand but well-maintained, suggesting care and pride despite obvious financial limitations. What struck Marcus most forcefully was the evidence of love that permeated every detail of the space. Tommy's drawings dominated the wall crayon masterpieces, depicting space adventures, superhero stories, and recurring family scenes that included the absent father he had never met. A small bookshelf overflowed with children's literature, each volume showing evidence of frequent reading. Toys were arranged with care, though Marcus noted that many appeared to be educational rather than purely recreational, suggesting Sarah's determination to stimulate her son's intellectual development despite their constrained circumstances. In the corner stood a hospital bed that had been modified to fit the small space, surrounded by IV equipment, monitors, and other medical devices that transformed the living room into a makeshift clinical environment. The sight of such extensive medical infrastructure in what should have been a normal family home drove home the reality of Tommy's condition more powerfully than any doctor's explanation could have achieved. "Tommy," Sarah called softly, "there's someone here who wants to meet you." The child who appeared in the doorway was so obviously Marcus's son that any doubt about paternity would have been absurd. Tommy Sterling Martinez possessed the distinctive Sterling jawline, the intelligent gray eyes that had characterized 4 generations of Marcus's family, and the commanding presence that seemed to emerge naturally from their genetic line. But these familiar features were rendered heartbreakingly fragile by the effects of chemotherapy and months of aggressive medical treatment. At 4 years old, Tommy was small for his age, his body weakened by the toxic medications that were simultaneously poisoning his cancer and challenging his developing immune system. His head showed only the faintest fuzz of hair beginning to grow back, and his skin had the translucent quality that came from spending more time in hospitals than in sunlight. Yet his eyes sparkled with intelligence and curiosity that no amount of medical trauma had been able to diminish. Tommy approached cautiously, studying Marcus with the analytical attention that Sarah had learned to recognize as a sign of his exceptional intellectual capacity. "Are you one of Mommy's friends from work?" he asked, his voice small but clear. Marcus knelt to bring himself to Tommy's eye level, his throat constricting with emotion as he faced his son for the first time. "I'm someone who's been hoping to meet you for a very long time, Tommy." "What's your name?" Tommy asked, moving closer with the fearless curiosity that seemed characteristic of children who had faced much worse things than stranger danger. "My name is Marcus," he replied, his voice carefully steady despite the emotional chaos churning in his chest. Tommy's eyes widened with sudden recognition, though not of the type Marcus had expected. "Marcus like Daddy? Mommy says Daddy's name is Marcus too, but he's on secret missions to save people." "Are you on secret missions?" The question created a moment of crystalline understanding about the impossible situation Sarah had navigated for 4 years. She had given Tommy his father's first name as part of the elaborate heroic mythology she had constructed, allowing her son to feel connected to his absent parent without revealing the devastating truth about Marcus's indifference. "Sometimes my work feels like secret missions," Marcus replied carefully, glancing at Sarah for guidance about how much truth to reveal. "What do you know about your daddy's missions?" Tommy's face lit up with the excitement of a child eager to share his favorite stories. "He fights bad guys who try to hurt families, and he builds special hospitals to help sick kids like me get better. Mommy says he can't visit because the bad guys might follow him here and hurt us, but he thinks about me every day and sends love through the stars." Each word was a dagger piercing Marcus's heart as he realized the depth of Sarah's sacrifice in maintaining these beautiful lies. She had created a father for Tommy that embodied everything Marcus had failed to be: selfless, protective, devoted, and willing to sacrifice personal happiness for his family's welfare. The real Marcus Sterling bore no resemblance to the heroic figure that lived in his son's imagination. "That sounds like a very brave and important daddy," Marcus managed, his voice thick with emotion he couldn't control. "Do you think I'll meet him someday?" Tommy asked, settling onto the couch beside Marcus with the casual trust that children extended to adults who showed genuine interest in their stories. "Mommy says maybe when I'm all better and the bad guys are defeated, but I dream about him lots and lots." Marcus looked across the room at Sarah, who stood frozen with terror at the direction the conversation was taking. Her worst fears were materializing before her eyes. Tommy's innocent questions were forcing them toward revelations that could either heal or devastate her son's fragile emotional state. "I think your daddy would want to meet you more than anything in the world," Marcus said finally, the words feeling inadequate to convey the magnitude of regret and love that was overwhelming him. Tommy studied Marcus's face with the perceptive intelligence that had worried his medical team since infancy. "You look sad. Are you sick too? Is that why you're friends with Mommy?" The question revealed the narrow world that Tommy inhabited, where adults were primarily categorized according to their relationship to illness and medical treatment. His universe consisted of doctors, nurses, other sick children, and the parents who navigated the healthcare system with their children. The concept of healthy adults who might visit for purely social reasons had become foreign to his experience. "I'm not sick," Marcus explained gently, "but I am worried about a little boy who means very much to me." "Is it me?" Tommy asked with the directness that only children possessed. "Are you worried about me?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that Marcus wasn't prepared to navigate. How could he explain to a 4-year-old that he was the father Tommy had been dreaming about for years? How could he admit that the heroic figure in Tommy's imagination was actually a man who had rejected his existence before even learning about it? "Yes," Marcus said simply. "I'm very worried about you, and I want to help you get better." Tommy's face brightened with sudden hope. "Are you a doctor? Do you know about the special medicine that might make my cancer go away forever?" The reference to experimental treatment sent Marcus's attention snapping to Sarah, who had told him earlier about the CAR-T therapy that offered Tommy's best hope for long-term survival. "What do you know about special medicine?" "Dr. Rodriguez says there's new medicine that could teach my body to fight cancer better, but it costs lots and lots of money." Tommy explained with the matter of fact tone children used when discussing concepts that should have been far beyond their understanding. Mommy works extra hard to try to get the money, but she gets sad when she thinks I'm not watching." Marcus felt the final pieces of his emotional defense crumbling as he realized that his son was fully aware of the financial pressures surrounding his treatment. Tommy understood that his survival depended on resources that were beyond his mother's reach, that Sarah was sacrificing everything to provide him with care that might not be enough to save his life. "What if I told you that the money for the special medicine wasn't a problem anymore?" Marcus asked, looking directly at Sarah as he spoke. "What if someone wanted to make sure you got the very best treatment available?" Sarah's expression shifted from protective anxiety to alarm as she recognized the direction Marcus was heading. "Tommy, sweetie, can you show Marcus your drawing supplies? I need to talk to him about something." Tommy nodded enthusiastically, pleased to have an audience for his artwork. He disappeared into his bedroom, leaving Marcus and Sarah alone for the first conversation they had been able to have without hospital staff or office interruptions. "Don't make promises you can't keep," Sarah said immediately, her voice tight with fear and anger. "Don't tell him that money isn't a problem unless you're prepared to commit to his long-term care, not just the immediate crisis." "I can pay for the CAR-T therapy," Marcus replied, "and anything else he needs. The cost isn't relevant." "It's not about the money, Marcus," Sarah shot back, moving closer to keep their conversation from carrying to Tommy's room. "It's about what happens after you write the check. Are you prepared to sit beside his bed during 12-hour chemotherapy sessions? Are you ready to hold him when he vomits from medications that make him feel like he's dying? Can you handle watching him lose weight until he looks like a skeleton, then gain it back from steroids until his face is swollen beyond recognition?" Each question forced Marcus to confront the reality of what parenting a seriously ill child actually required. His experience with children was non-existent, limited to brief encounters at company social events where employees' families appeared as background decoration to corporate celebrations. "I don't know how to do any of those things," Marcus admitted, "but I want to learn. I want to be the father he needs." "He needs the father he's been imagining for 4 years," Sarah replied. "Not someone who's suddenly interested in parenting because he's discovered that his genetics are involved. Tommy believes his daddy is a superhero who would move heaven and earth to be with him. Can you live up to that standard?" Before Marcus could respond, Tommy returned carrying an armful of art supplies and several drawings he was eager to share. "Look, this is the hospital where I get my medicine, and this is Dr. Rodriguez, who takes care of me. And this is the machine that gives me the special medicine through my port." Marcus studied the drawing, noting the accuracy with which Tommy had rendered medical equipment that no child should have needed to understand. The artwork revealed not just artistic talent, but the observational skills of someone who had been forced to pay attention to details that determined his survival. "And this one," Tommy continued, producing another drawing with obvious pride, "is what our house will look like when Daddy comes home and I'm all better. See? There's a room for Daddy and a big kitchen where Mommy doesn't have to worry about money and a backyard where I can play when I'm strong enough to run again." The drawing depicted a house that was enormous compared to their current apartment, with elaborate architectural details that revealed Tommy's sophisticated imagination. Most heartbreakingly, it showed all 3 family members standing together in the yard, holding hands under a sun that Tommy had colored with every yellow and orange crayon in his possession. "It's beautiful," Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly as he absorbed the magnitude of his son's dreams. "Tell me about this room for Daddy." "It has a big desk where he can plan missions to help other kids who are sick like me," Tommy explained, pointing to details he had carefully included. "And pictures of all the families he's saved, and a special phone that only calls other superheroes when he needs help with really important rescues." Marcus looked up to find Sarah watching him with an expression that mixed hope and terror in equal measure. She was witnessing her son's first conversation with his biological father, seeing Tommy's innocent enthusiasm for a man who had the power to either fulfill or destroy the heroic fantasies that had sustained him through months of painful treatment. "Tommy," Marcus said carefully, "what would you think if I told you that I was your daddy? That I was the person you've been drawing and dreaming about?" The question seemed to hang in the air forever, though it lasted perhaps 3 seconds. Tommy's eyes widened as he studied Marcus's face with renewed attention, looking for resemblances he had been trained by genetics to recognize. "Are you really my daddy?" Tommy asked, his voice small and filled with wonder. "Are you really the superhero who saves people?" Marcus felt the weight of his son's expectations settling on his shoulders like a mantle he had never prepared to wear. Tommy was looking at him with absolute trust, ready to embrace the father he had been imagining for his entire conscious life. The reality of Marcus Sterling, the cold businessman who had built his empire by prioritizing profit over people, bore no resemblance to the heroic figure in Tommy's mind. "Yes," Marcus said finally, the word feeling like both a promise and a confession. "I'm your daddy, Tommy, and I've been away for too long." Tommy's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. He launched himself into Marcus's arms with the full-body enthusiasm that only children possessed, his small frame trembling with excitement and relief. "I knew you would come. I knew you wouldn't forget about me forever." As Marcus held his son for the first time, feeling the fragile weight of the child he had unknowingly abandoned, he understood that his entire life had been reorganized in this moment. The business empire that had consumed his attention for decades suddenly seemed insignificant compared to the responsibility of living up to a sick child's heroic dreams. Over Tommy's head, Marcus met Sarah's eyes and saw his own transformation reflected in her expression. She was watching the meeting she had simultaneously longed for and dreaded for 4 years, seeing her son's joy at finally meeting his father, while knowing that the real Marcus Sterling had never chosen to be present for any of the moments that had defined Tommy's short life. "I missed you so much, Daddy," Tommy whispered against Marcus's chest, his words muffled but clearly audible. "Are you going to stay with us now? Are the bad guys all defeated?" Marcus tightened his arms around his son, feeling the full weight of Tommy's trust and hope settling into his heart like a permanent resident. "I'm going to stay," he promised, the words feeling like the most important business commitment he had ever made. "I'm going to take care of you and Mommy, and we're going to make sure you get the special medicine that will make you all better." As Tommy fell asleep in his father's arms for the first time in his life, Marcus Sterling began to understand that he had spent 38 years building the wrong kind of legacy. The empire that bore his name would someday be forgotten, but the child who carried his genetics and his dreams would be his true contribution to the world. If, that is, he could prove himself worthy of the superhero mantle that his son had been waiting 4 years for him to claim. The morning light filtered through the small windows of Sarah's apartment with the pale quality of late autumn, casting long shadows across the living room where Marcus had spent the night in an uncomfortable chair beside Tommy's hospital bed. He had refused Sarah's suggestion that he return to his penthouse, insisting with quiet determination that he needed to understand the daily reality of his son's battle against cancer. The decision had surprised them both, Sarah, because she had expected Marcus to retreat to his familiar world of controlled comfort, and Marcus, because he had never voluntarily subjected himself to physical discomfort for anyone else's benefit. Tommy stirred around 7 in the morning, his small body shifting carefully to accommodate the IV line that delivered medications throughout the night. His eyes opened slowly, focusing on Marcus with the wondering expression of a child trying to determine whether the previous evening's revelation had been real or merely another elaborate dream. "Daddy," Tommy whispered, his voice hoarse from the medications that kept his nausea manageable but left him constantly thirsty. "You're still here?" Marcus leaned forward, his expensive suit wrinkled beyond recognition from sleeping upright in a chair designed more for medical access than human comfort. "I'm still here, Tommy. I promised I would stay." The child's smile was radiant despite his obvious exhaustion, transforming his pale features with pure joy. "Does this mean you defeated all the bad guys? Can we be a real family now?" The innocent questions pierced Marcus with their absolute trust and expectation. Tommy had spent 4 years creating elaborate explanations for his father's absence, and now he was ready to seamlessly incorporate Marcus into the heroic narrative that had sustained him through months of painful treatment. The reality that Marcus had been building a business empire while his son fought for survival seemed too cruel to acknowledge. "We're going to figure out how to be a family," Marcus replied carefully, glancing at Sarah, who had emerged from the kitchen carrying Tommy's morning medications. "But first, we need to make sure you get the very best medical care available." Sarah approached with the measured caution of someone who had learned to be suspicious of promises that seemed too good to be true. Her morning routine with Tommy's medications had become a precisely choreographed dance, checking dosages, timing intervals, monitoring side effects, and maintaining the cheerful demeanor that kept her son's spirits elevated despite the chemical assault on his small body. "Time for your morning medicines, sweetheart," Sarah announced, settling onto the edge of the hospital bed with practiced efficiency. "The anti-nausea medication first, then the antibiotic, then your vitamins." Marcus watched in fascination as Tommy submitted to the complex medication regimen with the resigned cooperation of someone far older than his years. The child understood that his survival depended on accepting treatments that made him feel worse in the short term, a level of mature reasoning that no 4-year-old should have needed to develop. "After breakfast, we need to discuss Tommy's treatment options," Sarah said, directing her comment to Marcus while maintaining her focus on measuring liquid medications. "Dr. Rodriguez wants to schedule the CAR-T therapy consultation as soon as possible. I can arrange for immediate transfer to Memorial Sloan Kettering," Marcus replied, his instinct toward decisive action engaged by the medical urgency. "My assistant can coordinate with their admissions department to expedite the process." Sarah's hands paused in their precise movements, her expression shifting to something between gratitude and suspicion. "Marcus, experimental cancer treatment isn't something you can expedite through executive assistance and corporate influence. Medical decisions require careful evaluation, second opinions, and extensive planning." The gentle correction revealed how little Marcus understood about the world his son inhabited. His business experience had taught him that most obstacles could be overcome through the application of sufficient resources and strategic pressure. The medical system, particularly pediatric oncology, operated according to different principless scientific protocols, ethical considerations, and patient welfare standards that couldn't be circumvented through wealth or corporate power. "I want to understand," Marcus said, his usual commanding tone replaced by something approaching humility. "Tell me what Tommy needs, what the timeline looks like, what decisions have to be made." Over the next hour, as Tommy dozed fitfully between medication doses, Sarah explained the complexities of his treatment in detail that revealed her transformation from marketing professional to expert patient advocate. The CAR-T therapy required harvesting Tommy's T cells, genetically modifying them in specialized laboratories, then reintroducing the enhanced cells to his system after additional chemotherapy had prepared his body for the treatment. The process takes approximately 6 weeks from initial consultation to actual treatment, Sarah explained, consulting medical notes she had compiled over months of research. During that time, Tommy needs to maintain his current remission status while avoiding infections that could compromise his eligibility for the protocol. Marcus absorbed the information with the same analytical attention he applied to complex business negotiations, but the emotional stakes were unlike anything he had ever encountered. Corporate deals involved financial risk and strategic positioning. His son's treatment involved life and death decisions that couldn't be undone through subsequent negotiations. "What are the success rates?" Marcus asked, though he suspected Sarah had memorized every statistical projection related to Tommy's condition. 93% long-term remission for children Tommy's age with his specific leukemia variant," Sarah replied without hesitation. "But the treatment itself carries significant risk: severe infections, organ complications, neurological side effects that could impact his cognitive development." The casual mention of potential cognitive damage struck Marcus like a physical blow. Tommy's intellectual precocity was evident in every conversation, every drawing, every thoughtful question he asked about his condition and treatment. The possibility that life-saving therapy might compromise the brilliant mind that made Tommy so distinctly himself seemed like a choice between equally devastating alternatives. "And the cost?" Marcus asked, though he had already decided that financial considerations were irrelevant. $250,000 for the therapy itself, Sarah said, plus hospitalization, monitoring, and follow-up care that could extend for years. Most insurance companies are still evaluating coverage policies for experimental treatments. Marcus pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts, until he found his personal banking representative. "This is Marcus Sterling. I need to arrange an immediate wire transfer of $500,000 to Mount Sinai Hospital's Pediatric Oncology Department." "Marcus, stop," Sarah interrupted, her voice sharp with alarm. "You can't just throw money at this situation and expect it to resolve Tommy's medical needs." "Why not?" Marcus demanded, frustrated by her resistance to what seemed like an obvious solution. "Money removes the financial barriers to his treatment. It ensures he gets the best possible care without delays or compromises." Sarah stood up from Tommy's bedside, moving to the small kitchen where their conversation wouldn't disturb his restless sleep. Marcus followed, entering a space so compact that two adults could barely stand without touching. The kitchen revealed the same careful organization as the rest of the apartment, every inch of space utilized efficiently, with medical supplies stored alongside normal household items. "Because throwing money at Tommy's cancer doesn't make you his father," Sarah said, her voice low but fierce with protective anger. "He doesn't need a checkbook superhero who disappears when the novelty wears off. He needs someone who will be present for the daily struggle, not just the dramatic gestures." The accusation stung because it contained enough truth to wound. Marcus's instinct was to solve problems through the application of resources and strategic pressure approaches that had proven successful in every other area of his life but seemed inadequate when measured against the persistent work of actual parenting. "Then teach me," Marcus said, the request costing him enormous effort. "Show me what he needs beyond money. Help me understand how to be present for him." Sarah studied his face, searching for evidence of genuine commitment beneath the desperate urgency that had driven him to her apartment. Being Tommy's father means sitting beside his bed during 12-hour chemotherapy sessions when he's too sick to talk. It means learning to recognize the early signs of infection, fever, or medication reactions. It means reading the same bedtime story 15 times in a row because repetition comforts him when everything else in his world feels unpredictable. Each requirement she listed represented a fundamental departure from Marcus's usual existence. His life had been structured around efficiency, delegation, and the elimination of time-consuming activities that didn't directly contribute to business objectives. The idea of spending 12 consecutive hours in a hospital room, focused entirely on his son's comfort, seemed both terrifying and strangely appealing. "I want to learn," Marcus repeated, his voice carrying conviction that surprised even him. "But I also want to ensure that financial limitations don't compromise his care. Let me pay for the treatment, Sarah. Let me remove at least that source of stress from your life." Sarah was quiet for several minutes, wrestling with pride, protective instincts, and the practical reality that Tommy's survival might depend on resources she couldn't provide alone. "If you pay for his treatment," she said finally, "it has to be a commitment to his long-term welfare, not just a dramatic gesture that makes you feel better about 5 years of absence." "What does that commitment look like?" Marcus asked, recognizing that he was entering negotiations more complex and important than any business deal he had ever attempted. "It means being involved in every medical decision, not just writing checks and delegating the details to assistants," Sarah explained. "It means learning about his condition, understanding his medications, knowing his medical team, and being prepared to advocate for his needs even when it's inconvenient for your schedule." Before Marcus could respond, a small voice called from the living room, "Mommy? Daddy? I don't feel good." Both parents rushed to Tommy's bedside, where the child had managed to sit up despite obvious discomfort. His face was flushed with fever, and his breathing appeared slightly labored, symptoms that Sarah recognized immediately as potential signs of infection. "What hurts, sweetheart?" Sarah asked, her hands moving with practiced efficiency to check his temperature, examine his central line for signs of infection, and assess his overall condition. "My chest feels heavy and my head hurts," Tommy replied, leaning against Sarah for support. "And I'm cold but hot at the same time." Sarah's expression shifted to the controlled alarm that Marcus was learning to recognize as her crisis mode. She reached for her phone, dialing Dr. Rodriguez's emergency number while simultaneously gathering the medical supplies that Tommy would need for immediate transport to the hospital. "Dr. Rodriguez, it's Sarah Martinez. Tommy's running a fever of 102.4, complaining of chest heaviness and respiratory distress. We're bringing him in immediately." Marcus watched this emergency choreography with amazement and growing respect for Sarah's competence under pressure. She had transformed from concerned mother to efficient medical advocate within seconds, her actions guided by months of experience managing Tommy's complex health needs. "Can I help?" Marcus asked, feeling helpless in the face of his son's medical crisis. "Carry him to the car," Sarah instructed, gathering Tommy's medical kit and insurance documentation. "And call your driver, we need to get to Mount Sinai as quickly as possible." Marcus lifted Tommy carefully, shocked by how light his son felt despite being a healthy-sized 4-year-old before his illness. The child wrapped his arms around Marcus's neck with trusting dependence, his fever-warmed body trembling slightly with chills that had nothing to do with external temperature. "Are we going to see Dr. Rodriguez?" Tommy asked, his voice small but still curious despite his discomfort. "Will she give me medicine to make the heaviness go away?" "Yes, sweetheart," Sarah replied, her professional calm masking the terror that Marcus could see in her eyes. "Dr. Rodriguez will take very good care of you, just like always." The ride to Mount Sinai took 23 minutes that felt like hours, with Marcus holding Tommy while Sarah monitored his breathing and temperature. Marcus's driver, responding to the medical emergency with unusual speed and efficiency, navigated Manhattan traffic with the precision of someone who understood that every minute mattered. During the journey, Marcus experienced his first taste of the helpless terror that had become Sarah's constant companion over the past 8 months. Watching his son struggle with fever and respiratory distress while being unable to provide immediate relief challenged every instinct Marcus had developed about controlling his environment and solving problems through direct action. "His breathing is getting more labored," Sarah observed, her medical training evident in her clinical assessment, despite her obvious emotional distress. This could be pneumonia, which is extremely dangerous for children with compromised immune systems. At the hospital, Tommy was immediately admitted to the pediatric intensive care unit, where Dr. Rodriguez and her team worked with swift efficiency to stabilize his condition. Marcus and Sarah were relegated to the family waiting area, a space designed to provide comfort for parents facing their worst nightmares. "Preliminary chest X-rays confirm pneumonia in both lungs," Dr. Rodriguez explained when she emerged from Tommy's room 3 hours later. "We've started aggressive antibiotic therapy, but his immune system is severely compromised from chemotherapy. The next 48 hours will be critical." Marcus felt the ground shifting beneath him as he processed the implications of his son's condition. Tommy had been healthy, relatively speaking, just hours earlier, drawing pictures and excited about meeting his father. Now he was fighting for his life in an intensive care unit, his survival dependent on medical interventions that Marcus couldn't influence or control. "Can we see him?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the tears that had been threatening since Tommy's fever first spiked. "One parent at a time," Dr. Rodriguez replied. "He's sedated to help his breathing, but he may be aware of your presence." Sarah looked at Marcus, silently offering him the choice of who should go first. The gesture reflected a generosity that he hadn't earned but desperately needed. "You go," Marcus said. "You know how to comfort him better than I do." Over the next 2 days, Marcus experienced his first education in the reality of parenting a seriously ill child. The PICU operated according to rhythms defined by medical necessity rather than human convenience, visiting hours, medication schedules, and treatment protocols that reorganized normal life around clinical requirements. Marcus found himself sleeping in hospital waiting rooms, eating cafeteria food, and learning to read the subtle changes in monitoring equipment that indicated improvements or deterioration in Tommy's condition. His usual wardrobe of Italian suits was replaced by the same clothing worn for 3 consecutive days, his perfectly styled hair abandoned in favor of exhausted vigilance beside his son's bed. "You don't have to stay," Sarah told him on the second night, as they maintained their vigil in Tommy's darkened room. "This could go on for weeks. You have a company to run." "Sterling Industries can function without me for a few weeks," Marcus replied, surprising himself with the statement, "Tommy can't." The admission represented a fundamental shift in his priorities that he was still trying to understand. For 15 years, he had structured his entire existence around the company's needs, treating personal relationships as potential obstacles to professional success. Now, watching his son's chest rise and fall with the assistance of respiratory equipment, business objectives seemed irrelevant compared to the basic parental responsibility of being present during crisis. On the third day, Tommy's fever broke. Dr. Rodriguez emerged from his room with the first genuinely optimistic expression Marcus had seen since the crisis began. "The antibiotics are working. His lung function is improving, and his white blood cell count is responding appropriately. We're not out of the woods yet, but the immediate danger has passed." Marcus felt relief so intense it was almost physical, followed immediately by profound gratitude for the medical team that had pulled his son back from the edge of catastrophe. "When can we take him home?" "At least another week of observation," Dr. Rodriguez replied. "But this episode has important implications for his long-term treatment. The severity of this infection suggests that his immune system is more compromised than we originally assessed. We need to accelerate the timeline for CAR-T therapy." Sarah absorbed this information with the stoic acceptance that Marcus was learning to recognize as her default response to medical setbacks. "How much sooner?" "Ideally, we would begin the protocol within the next month," Dr. Rodriguez explained. "But that requires immediate acceptance into the Memorial Sloan Kettering program, which typically has a waiting list of several months." "What would it take to expedite his admission?" Marcus asked, his business instincts engaged by the challenge of overcoming bureaucratic obstacles. Dr. Rodriguez hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the implications of his question. "The program accepts patients based on medical need and protocol eligibility, not financial considerations or institutional influence." "But if funding weren't an issue," Marcus pressed, "if we could guarantee immediate payment for all associated costs, would that affect his position in the queue?" "Marcus," Sarah warned, recognizing the dangerous territory he was entering. "I'm not talking about buying preferential treatment," Marcus clarified, though he wasn't entirely certain that was true. "I'm talking about removing financial barriers that might delay medically necessary care." Dr. Rodriguez considered the question carefully. "If you could guarantee funding for the full treatment protocol, including experimental components that insurance typically doesn't cover, it might allow us to present Tommy's case more favorably to the selection committee." That afternoon, while Tommy slept peacefully for the first time in days, Marcus made a series of phone calls that transformed his son's medical options. He contacted Memorial Sloan Kettering's development office, offering a $5 million donation to their pediatric oncology research program. He arranged for Sterling Industries' corporate foundation to fund a new wing of the Children's Hospital. He leveraged every business relationship and social connection that might influence medical decision-making on Tommy's behalf. "You can't buy your way into experimental protocols," Sarah protested when she learned about his efforts. "Medical ethics don't work that way." "I'm not buying anything," Marcus replied, though he recognized the semantic distinction was probably meaningless. "I'm ensuring that Tommy gets evaluated for treatment based on medical merit, not financial limitations." The strategy worked with disturbing efficiency. Within 48 hours, Tommy had been accepted into Memorial Sloan Kettering's CAR-T therapy program, with treatment scheduled to begin immediately upon his recovery from pneumonia. The speed of acceptance suggested that Marcus's financial commitments had indeed influenced medical decision-making, raising ethical questions that neither parent was prepared to examine too closely. "I know you think I'm trying to solve everything with money," Marcus said to Sarah as they prepared to transfer Tommy to Memorial Sloan Kettering for the beginning of his experimental treatment. "But I can't give him back the 4 years I missed. I can't undo the damage of my absence during his early childhood. The only thing I can do is ensure he gets every possible chance for survival and recovery." Sarah studied his face, searching for evidence of the calculating businessman who had fired her just weeks earlier. Money can provide access to better treatment, she acknowledged. But it can't replace the daily presence that Tommy needs from his father. He's going to need you there during the frightening parts, not just the dramatic gestures. Then I'll be there, Marcus promised, the commitment feeling both terrifying and strangely liberating. Whatever he needs, however long it takes, I'll be present. As they prepared to begin the most intensive phase of Tommy's treatment, Marcus Sterling began to understand that transformation required more than writing checks or making grand pronouncements. His son needed a father who could sit patiently during endless medical procedures, who could maintain hope during setbacks, who could provide stability and love regardless of the outcome. Whether Marcus possessed those qualities remained to be proven through the daily work of being present for a child whose survival had become the most important business objective of his life. The experimental treatment that lay ahead would test not only Tommy's physical resilience, but Marcus's commitment to becoming the father his son had been dreaming about for 4 years. The superhero that Tommy had imagined, brave, devoted, and willing to sacrifice everything for his family's welfare, bore little resemblance to the man Marcus had been. But as he watched his son sleep peacefully in the hospital bed, surrounded by the medical equipment that was keeping him alive, Marcus Sterling began to believe that transformation might be possible, one day at a time, one difficult decision at a time, one moment of presence and love at a time. The November rain that had marked the beginning of Marcus Sterling's transformation exactly 1 year earlier now drummed against the windows of Sterling Industries with a rhythm that sounded less like chaos and more like renewal. The 42nd floor conference room buzzed with an energy that would have been unrecognizable to the employees who had witnessed Sarah Martinez's termination in this same space 12 months ago. Where once the atmosphere had been characterized by fear and rigid hierarchy, today's executive meeting hummed with collaborative discussion and genuine enthusiasm. Marcus Sterling stood at the head of the table. His appearance subtly but significantly changed from the intimidating CEO who had once commanded through fear and absolute authority. His Italian suits remained impeccably tailored, but his posture had relaxed from military rigidity to confident ease. The steel-gray eyes that had once been described as glacial now reflected warmth and engagement as he addressed his senior management team. Our employee satisfaction scores have reached record highs across all departments, Marcus announced, consulting the tablet that displayed metrics he would have dismissed as irrelevant just a year earlier. More importantly, productivity has increased by 23% since we implemented the flexible work arrangements and family support initiatives. The data represented a complete vindication of the revolutionary changes Marcus had initiated after Tommy's recovery. Sterling Industries had been transformed from a traditional corporate hierarchy that demanded personal sacrifice for professional advancement into a pioneering example of how companies could achieve exceptional results while supporting employees' family responsibilities. Sarah Martinez, now bearing the title of Vice President of Human Resources and Family Initiatives, leaned forward to address the room with the confident authority of someone whose vision had been validated through measurable success. Her transformation over the past year had been as dramatic as Marcus's, though in the opposite direction, from desperate single mother, working multiple jobs, to influential executive, implementing policies that would affect thousands of employees and their families. The family medical leave expansion has been particularly successful, Sarah reported, her voice carrying the professional competence that had always been present but was now fully recognized and supported. We've had 0 employee departures related to family health crises, compared to the industry average of 37%. Our reputation as a family-friendly employer has also dramatically improved our recruitment capabilities. Marcus nodded, remembering the resistance he had initially encountered when proposing these radical changes to his board of directors. Traditional business wisdom suggested that accommodating employees' personal needs would inevitably compromise operational efficiency and profit margins. The opposite had proven true. Workers who felt supported during family crises demonstrated unprecedented loyalty and productivity. The Child Care Initiative launch is scheduled for next month, added Linda Patterson, who had been promoted to Director of Employee Wellness after her compassionate support during Sarah's crisis had impressed the new management structure. We've received over 200 applications for the 60 available spots in our on-site facility. The Sterling Industries Child Development Center represented Marcus's most ambitious family support initiative, state-of-the-art facility occupying an entire floor of the building, staffed by licensed educators and medical professionals. The center provided not only traditional child care but also specialized support for employees dealing with children's medical needs, including on-site nursing care and coordination with pediatric specialists. As the meeting progressed through reports on various family-friendly programs, Marcus's attention was drawn to the framed drawing that occupied a place of honor on the conference room's main wall. Tommy's innocent artwork, the crayon depiction of his family that had shattered Marcus's carefully constructed emotional defenses, now served as the visual centerpiece of Sterling Industries' executive boardroom. The drawing had been professionally matted and framed, but its essential character remained unchanged. A 4-year-old's sincere representation of love, hope, and the family connections that give life meaning beyond professional achievement. Visitors to Sterling Industries often commented on the unusual artwork among the corporate awards and financial achievements, prompting Marcus to tell the story of how a child's drawing had taught him to redefine success. "Mr. Sterling," interrupted Jennifer, his executive assistant, who had learned to recognize the contemplative expression that indicated he was thinking about his son. "Tommy's school called to confirm your attendance at the Thanksgiving presentation tomorrow morning." Marcus smiled, checking his schedule with the automatic priority adjustment that had become second nature over the past year. Business meetings, no matter how important, were now scheduled around Tommy's school events, medical appointments, and the countless small moments that comprise the daily work of active parenting. "Reschedule the Yamamoto Industries follow-up to Thursday afternoon," Marcus instructed. "Tommy's been practicing his presentation for weeks, and I promised to be there." The casual rearrangement of a multi-million-dollar business negotiation to accommodate a 5-year-old's school presentation would have been inconceivable from the previous version of Marcus Sterling. Now such decisions reflected his fundamental understanding that professional success was meaningless without personal fulfillment, and that his son's happiness was a far more important legacy than any corporate achievement. After the meeting concluded, Marcus walked through the Sterling Industries offices with the relaxed confidence of a leader who had learned to inspire rather than intimidate. The transformation in workplace atmosphere was visible in countless small details. Employees who no longer flinched when he approached their desks. Family photos prominently displayed without fear of being perceived as unprofessional, and the comfortable buzz of conversation that had replaced the previous silence of fear. In the accounts management department, where Sarah had once worked under the constant threat of termination for personal emergencies, Marcus paused to observe the collaborative energy that had emerged under the new management philosophy. The department's productivity had increased dramatically, since employees were no longer afraid to communicate honestly about challenges or request support during family crises. "Mr. Sterling," called out David Chen, a junior analyst whose wife had recently given birth to twins. "I wanted to thank you personally for the parental leave expansion. Being able to take 6 weeks with my sons has been invaluable for our family." Marcus shook the young man's hand, remembering his own absence during Tommy's first months of life, with a mixture of regret and determination to ensure other fathers didn't repeat his mistakes. "Family comes first, David. The company benefits when our employees can be fully present for the people who matter most." The philosophy that had once seemed like corporate heresy had proven to be Sterling Industries' greatest competitive advantage. Companies across Manhattan were now attempting to replicate their family-friendly policies after observing the remarkable improvements in employee retention, productivity, and public reputation that had resulted from prioritizing human welfare alongside financial objectives. Marcus's transformation hadn't been limited to corporate policy changes. His personal life had been completely reorganized around the daily responsibilities of active fatherhood, a role he had approached with the same analytical intensity he had once applied to business challenges. The difference was that parenting required patience, emotional availability, and the willingness to prioritize another person's needs above his own ambitions, skills that no business school had prepared him to develop. The drive to Tommy's school in Astoria took Marcus through the same neighborhoods he had first visited a year earlier in shocked pursuit of his unknown son. Today, the journey felt like coming home rather than venturing into foreign territory. The modest apartment building where Sarah and Tommy had lived during their most difficult period had been replaced by a comfortable house in a family-friendly neighborhood, but Marcus had insisted on maintaining their connection to the community that had supported them during crisis. P.S. 158 Elementary School buzzed with the controlled chaos of Thanksgiving week, parents arriving for special presentations and autumn festivals that marked the transition into holiday celebrations. Marcus navigated the crowded hallways with the competence of someone who had become a familiar presence at school events, parent-teacher conferences, and the countless gatherings that marked a child's academic progress. Tommy's classroom was decorated with construction paper turkeys and handwritten gratitude lists that revealed the authentic wisdom of 5-year-olds learning to articulate appreciation for the people and experiences that enriched their lives. Mrs. Rodriguez, Tommy's kindergarten teacher, had become one of Marcus's favorite people through her patient dedication to helping children recover from medical trauma while maintaining age-appropriate academic expectations. "Mr. Sterling," Mrs. Rodriguez greeted him with genuine warmth. "Tommy has been so excited about his presentation. He's been practicing his speech about gratitude all week." Marcus found Tommy near the classroom reading corner, engaged in animated conversation with several classmates about the upcoming presentations. The transformation in his son's appearance over the past year was remarkable, from the pale, fragile child battling cancer to a healthy 5-year-old whose energy seemed to radiate from every gesture and expression. "Daddy!" Tommy called out, rushing to embrace Marcus with the unself-conscious enthusiasm that had become the highlight of every day. "You came! I told everyone you would be here, and now they can meet my daddy, the superhero." The title had evolved over the past year, from Tommy's innocent fantasy to a description that Marcus had learned to accept with humility and determination. He wasn't a superhero in the traditional sense, but he had committed himself to being the father his son deserved, present, engaged, and willing to prioritize Tommy's welfare above all other considerations. "I wouldn't miss your presentation for anything," Marcus assured him, settling into one of the tiny plastic chairs that accommodated adult visitors to elementary school classrooms. "Tell me what you're going to share about gratitude." Tommy's face lit up with the excitement of a child eager to demonstrate his academic preparation. "I'm going to talk about being grateful for Dr. Rodriguez, who made me better, and for Mommy, who never gave up, and for you coming home to be my real daddy instead of just my dream daddy." The casual reference to their complicated history no longer caused Marcus the sharp pain it had triggered during Tommy's initial recovery. Through months of family counseling and patient conversation, they had developed age-appropriate ways for Tommy to understand his father's absence and return without being burdened by adult complexities of abandonment and reconciliation. As the presentation began, Marcus watched his son approach the front of the classroom with the confident bearing that had emerged as his health stabilized and his family life provided the security every child needed. Tommy's speech was heartfelt and articulate, revealing not only his gratitude for recovery, but his sophisticated understanding of how many people had contributed to his healing and happiness. "I'm grateful for getting better from cancer," Tommy announced to the assembled parents and classmates, "and for Dr. Rodriguez at the hospital, who taught my body to fight the bad cells. I'm grateful for my mommy, who worked super hard to take care of me, even when she was scared. And I'm grateful for my daddy, who came home to be with us and who reads me stories every night and helps me with my math homework." The simple eloquence of a 5-year-old's gratitude moved several parents to tears. But Marcus was struck by Tommy's instinctive understanding of how individual healing required community support. His son had learned, through direct experience, that recovery from trauma required not just medical intervention, but the sustained commitment of people willing to prioritize love over convenience. After the presentation, Marcus joined Sarah in the school cafeteria for the Thanksgiving feast that had become one of their favorite family traditions. Sarah's transformation over the past year had been as remarkable as his own, though her changes represented recognition and support for capabilities that had always existed rather than fundamental personality reconstruction. "How was the board meeting this morning?" Sarah asked, settling beside him at the small table where Tommy was enthusiastically consuming turkey and stuffing with the appetite of a healthy child who had learned not to take food for granted. "Employee satisfaction scores reached new records," Marcus reported, "and the family medical leave program has exceeded all projections for both utilization and positive outcomes." The success of Sterling Industries' family-friendly initiatives had surprised even Marcus, though Sarah had predicted the positive results from the beginning. Her understanding of employee needs and workplace dynamics had proven invaluable in designing policies that supported families while maintaining operational excellence. "The Jenkins family sent a thank you card," Sarah continued, referring to an employee whose daughter had required emergency surgery for a rare condition. "They said being able to take full medical leave without financial penalty made the difference between coping with crisis and being destroyed by it." Marcus nodded, remembering his own helpless terror during Tommy's pneumonia crisis and understanding how much worse the experience would have been if complicated by employment and financial insecurity. The policies they had implemented weren't just corporate benefits, they were recognition of the fundamental human reality that family emergencies required community support. "Daddy," Tommy interrupted, tugging on Marcus's sleeve with chocolate-stained fingers, "can we go to the office after lunch? I want to show Mrs. Patterson my new drawing." The request had become routine over the past year as Tommy had developed his own relationships with Sterling Industries employees who had watched his recovery with invested concern. The office had become an extension of his family environment, where his artwork decorated multiple departments and his presence reminded everyone of the human priorities that guided their professional decisions. That afternoon, Sterling Industries buzzed with the relaxed energy of a company approaching a holiday weekend. Marcus walked through the offices with Tommy beside him, observing how naturally his son interacted with employees who had become extended family through their shared investment in his welfare. "Tommy," Linda Patterson called out from the Human Resources Department, "I've been waiting to see your latest masterpiece." Tommy proudly displayed his newest artwork, a drawing of Sterling Industries building with stick figures representing various employees positioned throughout the structure. The image revealed his sophisticated understanding of the workplace as a community where people collaborated to achieve shared objectives while supporting each other's personal needs. "This is you, Mrs. Patterson," Tommy explained, pointing to a figure surrounded by smaller drawings that represented children. "You help all the mommies and daddies take care of their kids when they get sick." The accuracy of his observation reflected how carefully Tommy had listened to adult conversations about the company's family support initiatives. His artwork had evolved from simple family representations to complex depictions of community structures that supported individual welfare through collective commitment. As they toured the office, Marcus was struck by the visible evidence of cultural transformation that had occurred over the past year. Family photos were prominently displayed without apology. Employees discussed their children's activities without fear of professional repercussions, and the general atmosphere reflected engagement rather than anxiety. In Marcus's office, Tommy immediately gravitated toward the framed drawing that occupied the wall behind his father's desk. The original artwork that had precipitated their reunion had become a corporate symbol of the values that now guided Sterling Industries' approach to business and employee relations. "That's the picture that brought you home," Tommy observed with the matter-of-fact tone children used when discussing events that adults found emotionally overwhelming. "Mommy says it was magic, but I think it was just love that was waiting to be found." The sophisticated observation revealed how much Tommy had grown both intellectually and emotionally over the past year. His recovery from cancer had been paralleled by psychological development that reflected the security and stimulation that came from being genuinely wanted and supported by both parents. "Tell me about this love that was waiting to be found," Marcus said, settling into his desk chair while Tommy examined the various artifacts that decorated the office. "Well," Tommy began with the serious expression he adopted when explaining complex concepts. "I always knew I had a daddy somewhere, and you always had a little boy somewhere, but you just didn't know where to look for each other." The picture helped you remember that families are more important than being busy all the time. The child's explanation was more accurate than most psychological analyses Marcus had encountered during the family counseling that had helped them navigate their unusual reunion. Tommy's instinctive understanding that love required presence rather than perfection had guided their relationship development more effectively than any expert advice. As evening approached, the Sterling family prepared to leave the office for their nightly routine dinner together, homework supervision, and the bedtime stories that had become Marcus's favorite part of each day. The domestic rhythm that had seemed impossible to achieve just a year earlier now felt as natural and essential as breathing. "Mr. Sterling," called out James Morrison, the security chief who had witnessed Sarah's termination and Tommy's dramatic revelation, "have a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday with your family." The casual blessing reflected how completely the Sterling Industries culture had evolved to embrace family priorities alongside professional objectives. Employees who had once worked late from obligation now left promptly to attend their children's activities, knowing that their commitment to family welfare was viewed as a professional strength rather than a personal weakness. During the drive home to their house in Astoriath, compromise location that allowed Tommy to maintain friendships while providing space for their expanded family, Marcus reflected on the comprehensive transformation that had begun with a Breaston Hove child's innocent drawing. His entire understanding of success, leadership, and personal fulfillment had been reconstructed around the recognition that human connections provided the only lasting meaning in life. "Daddy," Tommy said from his car seat, where he was coloring another family portrait that included the extended network of doctors, teachers, and Sterling Industries employees, who had become part of their support system. "When I grow up, can I work at your company and help other kids whose daddies don't know how to find them?" The question revealed Tommy's emerging sense of purpose and his understanding that their family's healing had created opportunities to help others facing similar challenges. Marcus and Sarah had established the Sterling Family Foundation, which provided support for single parents dealing with childhood medical crises, ensuring that other families wouldn't face the isolation and financial pressure that had characterized their early experience. "If that's what you want to do," Marcus replied, "we'll make sure you have every opportunity to help other families. But first, you need to focus on being a little boy who gets to play and learn and grow up healthy and happy." That evening, as Marcus read bedtime stories to Tommy, a ritual that had become the anchor of his daily routine, he marveled at how completely his priorities had been reordered through the simple act of discovering that he was a father. The business empire that had once consumed his every waking moment now existed primarily to provide stability and resources for his family and employees' families. "Daddy," Tommy said as Marcus finished the third repetition of his favorite story about a superhero who saved the world by helping families stay together, "are you going to read me stories when I'm grown up too?" "If you want me to," Marcus replied, tucking the blankets around his son with the careful attention that had replaced his former impatience with anything that didn't directly contribute to professional advancement. "I think I'll always want you to," Tommy said sleepily, "because that's when I feel the most safe and loved." Later that night, as Marcus stood in his home office reviewing the day's business reports, he reflected on how completely his definition of achievement had evolved. The quarterly profit margins that had once been his primary focus now served mainly to ensure the company's stability and its ability to support employee families. The true measures of success had become Tommy's laughter, Sarah's peace of mind, and the knowledge that Sterling Industries had become a place where other parents could balance professional responsibilities with family commitments. The framed drawing that had started this transformation occupied a place of honor in his home office as well, a daily reminder of how close he had come to missing the most important relationship of his life. Tommy's innocent artwork had shattered the illusion that professional success could substitute for human connection, teaching Marcus that the only legacy that mattered was the love and security he could provide for his family, and the positive impact he could have on other families' welfare. As Thanksgiving approached, Marcus Sterling understood that his gratitude extended far beyond the recovery of a son he had never known he was missing. He was grateful for the complete reconstruction of his understanding of what made life worth living, for the opportunity to become the father Tommy deserved, and for the chance to create a business culture that supported rather than destroyed the family relationships that gave work its ultimate meaning. The rain continued to fall against the windows of their comfortable home, but it no longer sounded like chaos. Instead, it resembled a gentle rhythm that marked the passage of time in a life finally organized around the priorities that truly mattered: love, presence, and the daily commitment to putting family first in a world that often forgot the human cost of professional ambition. In Tommy's bedroom, the 5-year-old slept peacefully surrounded by new artwork that depicted their family not as distant figures separated by white space, but as 3 people standing close together, holding hands under a sun colored with every crayon in his possession. The transformation was complete, from strangers connected only by genetics to a family united by choice, commitment, and the recognition that love required presence rather than perfection. 1 year after a child's drawing had stopped a CEO cold, Marcus Sterling had learned that the greatest success story of his life wasn't the billion-dollar empire he had built, but the family he had almost lost, and the thousands of employees whose families were now stronger because one man had finally learned to prioritize what truly mattered. The drawing that had revealed his son's existence had become a corporate symbol, a family treasure, and a daily reminder that sometimes the most profound transformations begin with the innocent wisdom of a child who believes that love can overcome any obstacle.